For 30 years, Joe Ramirez arrived at the same auto shop every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. It didn't matter if it was pouring rain, snowing sideways, or blazing hot, Joe was there. First one in, last one out. He wasn't just another mechanic. He was the shop. He trained half the team, remembered every customer's name, and could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it hum. There was grease under his fingernails that hadn't washed out in decades, and stories behind every scar on his hands. He wasn't in it for the money, it was pride. A handshake kind of man in a touchscreen world. Asterisk, so when the new corporate owners walked in one Friday afternoon with their polished shoes and glossy brochures, Joe didn't think much of it. Change in ownership was nothing new. But what was new was the HR rep who called him into the break room and slid a thick envelope across the table without even looking him in the eye. Asterisk, we appreciate your years of service, Joe, but we're going in a new direction. This is your severance package. Today will be your last day. Asterisk, Joe blinked. His first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion, then embarrassment, then a slow rising flame in his chest. He stood up, quietly, took off the name patch that read Joe, placed it on the table, and left without a word. Asterisk, the next morning, he didn't get up at 5:15 like usual. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick. His wife Maria placed a gentle hand on his chest and said, "It's their loss, Joe, not yours." He nodded but didn't answer. By noon, the silence was too loud. He went to the garage, not to fix anything, but just to be near his tools. He opened the drawers one by one, like flipping through an old photo album. Each wrench had a story. Every stain on the floor had a memory. Asterisk, he didn't eat much that day, or the next. Asterisk, but on Monday, something changed. Joe got in his old beat-up Ford pickup and drove without telling Maria down to the edge of town. There, covered in vines and forgotten by time, stood Earl's Gas and Auto. Boarded up since 2003, he stepped out, crunched across the gravel, and stared at the cracked windows. The sign above the garage doors was missing letters. It just read E_A_Ls. Asterisk, Joe stood there for hours, arms folded, not saying a word. Asterisk, by the next day, he had a plan. Asterisk, he spent 2 sleepless nights doing something he hadn't done in years. Dreaming. Really dreaming. Not about retirement or fishing or some beach house in Florida, but about oil, steel, sweat, and purpose. He pulled some of his savings, dipped into the retirement fund, and called up a buddy from the bank who still owed him a favor. Asterisk, within 2 weeks, Joe's honest garage had a business license, insurance, and a fresh coat of red paint over the rusted sign. It wasn't fancy. The floor was uneven. The lift groaned louder than a tractor, and the only advertising he had was a handmade wooden board out front that read, in thick white letters, "Real repairs by a real mechanic." Below it, in smaller print, "No BS." Asterisk, at first. Nobody came, not for days. Asterisk, Maria was worried. What if it doesn't work? She asked him one night while he was under the hood of an old Chevy. Asterisk, then I go down doing what I love. Joe replied without looking up. Asterisk, but people started to notice. Asterisk, it began with neighbors. Then a woman who had remembered Joe fixing her father's Buick 20 years ago. Then a teenager with a busted alternator and no money, who Joe helped anyway. Word spread fast. 2 months in, Joe had more business than he could handle. His crew started showing up, one by one. Some had also been laid off. Others had quit in protest. Joe hired 3 of them back on the spot. Asterisk, there was Ricky, the young guy with tattoos and a temper, who Joe had mentored out of a rough crowd. There was Tanya, the best transmission tech in the county, who had left the old shop the day Joe got fired. And there was Mel, 65 years old, who'd said he'd never touch a wrench again until he could work for someone he respected. Asterisk, they made a killer team. Not perfect, but honest. Customers came back. They brought their kids. Left handwritten thank you notes. One woman brought homemade tamales every Friday just to say thanks. Asterisk. Then something happened that none of them expected. Local news showed up. Apparently, a customer had posted about Joe's story on social media. It went viral. Fired after 30 Years now running the most honest garage in town, the caption read, "The Post had over 100,000 shares." The news crew wanted to do a feature. Joe didn't even own a smartphone, but he agreed. Asterisk, when the segment aired, everything exploded. Joe's garage was flooded with calls. Some people drove over 100 miles just to get a quote from the man who didn't sell out. Asterisk, and then came the twist no one saw coming. Asterisk, the regional director from the corporate shop, the one that fired him, showed up unannounced one morning. Slick haircut, pressed blazer, company SUV. Asterisk, he stepped inside Joe's garage like he still owned the air. Around him, asterisk Joe, he said, with a practiced smile, "We've been watching your success. Frankly, we're impressed. I think there's an opportunity for both of us. You could franchise. Join us again, but under better terms. We'd like to buy you a tour partner." Asterisk Joe looked at him for a long moment, then he wiped his hands on a rag, tossed it onto the workbench, and walked over slowly. Asterisk, he didn't yell. Didn't curse asterisk, he just said, "You had 30 years to treat people right. I've got 30 left to do it my way." Then he pointed to the door. The man left without another word. Asterisk, today. Joe's Honest Garage has a wait list for new customers, and he's training the next generation of mechanics who value people over profit. He holds free workshops for teens on weekends. He teaches them how to change oil, rotate tires, and not get taken advantage of by shady shops. Asterisk, he still wears the same boots, still brings his own coffee, still arrives at 6 a.m. sharp. Asterisk, Joe was fired after 30 years of loyalty, but what he did next didn't just shock people, inspired them. Asterisk. He proved that even when the world forgets your worth, you can still write your own ending. And sometimes that ending turns out better than the one you thought you'd earned.